He is an inventor of a linguistic program that uses language and content on the web to look into and predict future trends. He is world renowned for his various predictions and his analysis of information on the web. And we have him for a few minutes here today to talk about some amazing things. He is my buddy, my pal, Clif. Hi. How you doing, Clif?
I'm doing just fine. Only I don't bake cakes. I bake pies.
Okay, well, it was like,
pies are easy.
Pie baking, that's better, too. So I had a lot of questions for you, but I was just going to let you run. You had some stuff to say.
I just wanted to note a few things.
Yeah, that's all. So I related something that you wrote yesterday on the that you told me that they're going to completely open up the money supply for the next couple of months, and that apparently they'll give a loan to a ham sandwich to try to make it look as though the economy is somehow recovering, and it's the return of what they call liar's loans in order to do something to pump up the economy before the Republicans sweep the Senate, which would be very bad trouble for Obama coming this November. So what's up with that?
Well, that's quite true. The government has decided that that's the way to go, is to open up this particular avenue and try and reinflate what led to the subprime crisis. And what they want to do is they want to reinflate the underlying base asset for these derivatives that are in trouble. And our data shows the derivatives are going to go all bluey in October, which I discussed in the latest report that I've got out. But really what I wanted to, and that's the situation at the moment. They're trying to, as you say, give ham sandwiches loans as long as they show up with a Social Security number and the appropriate documentation that can be used to support the lies.
Which people are telling me now, because we're doing some bond process for people, and I asked them to go get another Social Security card, because the key to the matrix is actually a number on the back of the Social Security card, which is called an offset bond number. And now they're telling me, because these are people from all across the country, they're telling me that they can't even get into the Social Security offices because they're apparently handing out Social Security cards to illegal aliens like tacos. And they go to the Social Security office, and there's nobody that speaks English actually in the line, and they're just all, lining up. And apparently they just need birth certificates from whatever country they're from to get these Social Security cards, which I told people, of course, they're going to issue as many as they can, because that's what they borrow money against in Social Security cards. Each one, if you take the number of Social Security cards in the country and you divide that by $18 trillion, which is the national debt, you get what each of these cards is worth, which comes to something like some crazy number, like, I don't know, like each card is worth like $30 billion or something. So, all right, so go ahead with what you wanted to talk about. You had some pressing.
Wait a second, hang on. Let's divert for just a second. There's a little bit of info I have about Social Security and why they're desperate for that.
Okay.
It's going to reach its inevitable conclusion as a Ponzi scheme, a friendly Ponzi scheme, but still Ponzi scheme. It was due to collapse in, I think, the 9th month of next year.
Oh,
between there and the subsequent March. So in that range. So Social Security is going to go bust simply because we're in a situation where we're going to cross a demographic threshold where you would have one poor fellow, I won't go into it, one poor fellow who's working, or one poor woman who's working, who's trying to support 2.5 people on retirement.
Well, that's the glory of socialism, is that it only works until you run out of people to squeeze. It's like that Obama Happy Meal at McDonald's, where you order anything you want and all the people behind you pay for
it. There you go. Perfect. Anyway, so to go along with that Happy Meal, which you'll need to stay happy,
that's good.
We've got a lot of information about radiation along the West Coast.
Okay.
And I had to reluctantly fire up my calibrated Geiger meters, radiation count meters, and indeed confirmed that we are now at a background level up here in Washington State of about 120 clicks a minute.
Don't tell me. Every time you tell me this, I get itchy. I'm telling you. I'm like,
well, hey, you should.
I just get a little bit of sunburn. I'm like, oh no, I've got radiation poisoning. I got to go to iodine. I got to start eating kelp. And I watched like 100 episodes of House. This summer, and I swear I have all those diseases. I'm like, I got Wilson's disease, I got Hashimoto's disease, I've got sarcoidosis, I got stuff I've never heard of.
Help you against the radiation.
I get itchy. I swear to God, I feel like, am I getting a little hot? I'm just like, oh no, I've got radiation poisoning. I don't know. So,
Well,
All right,
it actually is. It's
left.
a terrible thing to joke about, but it's quite severe from your area all the way north up through Vancouver and into Alaska.
Or is it worse?
It's at the moment we've got reports on the ground in areas north of Vancouver Island, but on the mainland in this sort of little gap between there and the Haida Gwaii Islands. And that gap is funneling in radiation that's up to about 500 clicks a minute. And it's so that's quite severe. But even beyond that, in 2 instances, I've had contact with people that were flying with Geiger meters that were surreptitiously monitoring the rad level. And one guy almost freaked out. He said he almost puked in the aisle because he was at 880 and it sustained 880 clicks per minute, sustained for 40 minutes between Portland and California.
Wow.
And even worse than that now are reports that I've got verified by friends in the business that both horses and goats all up and down in California are showing, quote, new diseases that the vets can't identify. Well, what are these diseases? Basically, the poor critters are deteriorating from radiation poisoning in gestation coming in from the cesium that's getting in the grass. Yeah. The cesium levels are about twice what they should be in the atmosphere at the moment. Plus, let's get really weird here. There's two strange things. There's this very heavy uranium mining operation going on in Saskatchewan, way up in this Athabasca Basin, which is in a way somehow connected to Hudson Bay. There are those people that think Hudson's Bay is a meteor impact. I'm not so sure about that. It may be the same kind of thing that is forming now in Siberia, where these giant holes blow out. Have you heard about that? Okay. Yep. Our data shows that there's going to be a ring of such holes as a huge chunk of a plate comes loose from the surrounding plate. Now, in a small enough area, if Hudson's Bay was an example of that way back when, it would look exactly as it does today with a central clean edge circular, more or less circular pattern in at least one chunk of it, and then areas where there's ejecta. And we know now that there's some association now between this very high content uranium mine in Saskatchewan and similar uranium deposits that are being found throughout Canada and the Northwest Territories in a pattern that resembles ejecta. And so here's the theory. If the Earth is expanding and these holes in Siberia punch up, sort of like you might take a paper punch and go through the skin of an orange and make a little circular area that you could punch out a bigger chunk, and that's what we would have forming in Siberia as it had potentially in Hudson's Bay. And then at some point, the new matter being created by the center of the planet ejects itself around or through those holes that have been created around this little chunk of a plate. And at that point, that plate may indeed submerge or fall because there's not enough underlying mantle support. Sort of makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if Hudson's Bay is an example of that, in this kind of an action, you would get ejecta thrown as a result of this new material coming out of the middle of the Earth for great distances, and without volcanic action, mind you. Okay, so it's going to be really weird, and the ejecta would be expected to be of very high purity, simply because it would be the primal material being thrust out of the planet and deposited on the surface by basically what we could think of as a giant compressed air gun formed in the planet itself. And we do find that the uranium through the samples that are being taken all through this ring around Hudson's Bay have a level of purity that's nearly 100 times more than any uranium ore found in any other part of the planet. And the level of purity is all within a very small level of sample of each other. So that may be occurring, that may be what is occurring in Siberia, which I'm sure if that actually pops off in a great chunk of the Siberian plate in a quasi-circular pattern, suddenly becomes loose, that's going to change everybody's plans for a few millennia.
Yeah,
and the ejecta,
Tuesday.
Exactly, and the ejecta could be quite odd. We don't know what it might be. Could be minerals, could be water, could be gases, but whatever it'll be in quantity. Now, excuse me, we also have die-offs all up and down the West Coast in the marine environment. Some areas that are truly staggering, mile after mile after mile of nothing alive. Now, this is, again, most concentrated up north of about 45 degrees latitude. And the reason that this might be due to the level of acidity that's washing out of the British Columbia forest from the death of the forest material not being able to hold the water anymore. And so it's washing off all those tons and tons and tons of aluminum put there by the chemtrails.
Right.
Or in combination with the radiation, because we know that there's been a large sampling of radiation mutations along Washington coast, Oregon, and California. So it's gotten quite serious. Now, your skin diseases you were talking about, the itching and so on, that is, to a certain extent, nothing to joke about, because that's what those horses and goats are going through. Right. I've got a friend of mine that's in the goat business, and he had a very terrible 2 years of new goats coming out. Their birth rate had fallen to about a quarter of what it had been, and he also had a couple of mutations in the hooves that were not good. And now he's got goats that have been born since Fukushima went off are showing tumors and are starting to die of very strange diseases, literally the skin falling off the ears, that kind of thing. So indeed, the same sort of skin diseases that were reported in the peripheral areas of the Hiroshima blasts. So it's gotten quite serious, and people need to take this into consideration and observe their health and react accordingly. Not necessarily get too freaked out about individual small complaints or become hypochondriac about it, but you now need to seriously, in my opinion, take active measures to combat what is a daily, not very healthy radiation level exposure if you're anywhere along the West Coast or if you're flying anywhere in the United States. It seems more concentrated here than in Europe, but it's more or less a global phenomenon if you're flying. The reports I'm getting in Europe are about 330 sustained as opposed to 880.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
So what do people do? Do they? I mean, there are things they can do. Iodine. You take. If
you're going to do that, you need to take pure primal iodine. Iodized salt won't do it, and iodine only protects you against the uptake of radioactive material into the thyroid, and you may have to worry now about cesium and strontium. And if that's the case, you need to be concentrating on things like. You should remember this one, you silly goof. Melissa, the herb, lemon balm, two cups a day at least, good quality water, long steep time. It'll make you a little bit tranquil and happy. So be careful about driving and so forth with it. You won't want to be an extreme athlete after having had a couple of cups, but it is seriously recommended for flushing radiation out of your body. And you really should investigate based on your body type. And some other factors, your health, age, and so on. Those things you can do. There's sources all over the internet for this. Green Wellness is a good source or just put in, anti-radiation, herbs, that sort of thing. You have to know your body type though, and because that's going to be a real key here. If, for instance, you're thin, you're going to have a tendency to concentrate radiation in certain specific areas, cartilage and bone. If you're not so thin, you may concentrate it in, and you may find that it's going to affect things like veins and arteries, simply because that's where the fat is circulating, and the fat's going to pick it up first. So, but we really do need to take active measures now. There's other things you can do, like a lot of wheatgrass consumption, because the magnesium comes on in. The chlorophyll comes on in, and it's only one molecule away, magnesium versus iron, from hemoglobin. So it builds your blood up. So it's a tonic in that regard. And if you wanted to hunt out, traditional Chinese medicine, TCM tonics or Ayurveda tonics, you'll find that there's any number of them that also do cleansing and help you get rid of buildup of toxins. And that's what is a very large part of the anti-radiation story. When Chernobyl happened in Russia, they brought a lot of the workers there that suffered the most radiation damage to hospitals here in the Pacific Northwest. And we had a first-hand view of the procedures that these fellows had to undergo. And it's true they didn't have a very high success rate, but those people that did survive and were able to get completely clean of the radiation had no problems thereafter. So it wasn't like it claimed them years later. They had a more or less normal lifespan as far as anybody could determine, if it didn't kill you right away.
Huh.
So now in this regard, what we need to do, like I say, is to simply monitor your health and be aware we're now living in a radiation or a radioactive atmosphere that includes the oceans and the air. And curiously, this other curious part of this whole process, there are people I know that do monitoring for various different kinds of scientific reports and studies that are paid for by governments all over. And most of these guys are in the environmental business, especially in this neck of the woods. And what they've been doing is doing some flyouts in British Columbia where they've had huge number of tree die-off due to the chemtrailing. And one of the fellows also took out a paddle-based, very specific, shielded pickup nuke meter, rad counter. And he was able to determine, oddly enough, that the higher level of radiation was coming directly from above the airplane, not from below the airplane. And so it is clearly that we're dealing with an airborne material that in the small plane he was in was totally surrounding him, but at the same time it appeared to be falling on him or coming out of the high atmosphere. And so here's something else. You need to watch where the jet streams are going, because they will be the depository streams for the heavier materials, the strontium, the cesium, and so forth, that will be coming from Fukushima. We don't have to worry so much about radioactive iodine, except unless there's another burst out of reactor 2, which I don't think will be the case. All that makes sense?
Yeah, it's
okay.
I should really stock up on Reynolds wrap. I think I need to not just make a hat, but like a whole suit out of aluminum foil now.
There's a very famous sailor who did just that because of the quality of heavy-duty cooking foil made his boat warm enough that he was able to sail a little tiny sailboat all up into the Arctic oceans. And he noticed when he got back that indeed the outside of the boat was all radioactive, but the inside was not, probably due to exactly the fact that he used a heavy-grade cooking foil as the way to insulate that tiny little boat. He was like a 21-footer. It was Sea Dart, yeah. Tristan Jones.
We should probably cue the song "Aluminum Foil" by Weird Al Yankovic now. So it's
there you go. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Any other pops on the horizon? I know I only promised to have you on for just a short while because I know you're busy. But
nope. You can ask anything you want. I just wanted to mention that about the rads because I'd confirmed it with our rad meter here, and I've been talking to people up and down the coast that I know and trust with their meters because theirs are calibrated. Yeah. And we in fact went through the trouble of calibrating my guy Kale's meter here. And got to the same conclusion that we're cooking.
Right. And the after effects of this are obviously, cancer, disease, all kinds of things.
Not obviously. Okay, not obviously. If you want to look at it in a weird way, an energetic viewpoint, it is not obvious that we need to succumb to that because of the work I've done with like personal vibration energy body stuff and solar influences, because the sun has changed, right? In my lifetime it has changed from a mellow yellow to this harsh and searing white, and it's on its way to probably a blue-white, which is what has NASA and all these people quite scared.
Yes.
But in any event, we should be able to attune to and accept a slightly higher level of radiation in our environment up to a certain point, but it's going to require...
Okay, hold on. This is our hard break.
Sure.
We'll see if we can get Clif to stick with us. If not, Clif I, ladies and gentlemen. And we'll be back after this. So the radiation levels are going from bad to worse. Do you think the radiation levels here have anything to do with the drought in California? There are some people who are claiming that maybe HAARP or some government weather control was creating some kind of jet stream blockade off the coast to maybe keep a lot of this radiation from reaching us. But considering the fact that we've now have no water and everything is radioactive, and by the way, those are farms that are using the water, by the way. The cities in California use something like less than 20% of the total water of the state. So the majority of it goes into farming. And please remember that we provide something like 40% of the food for the rest of the United States. We exclusively do rice and pistachios and strawberries and artichokes and avocados and all this stuff. I mean, 40% of the food that's grown is grown here in California. So, and once again, thanks to the jagoff environmentalists here, these left wing, and I don't know what to call them because I don't know if left wing, right wing, but just complete yabos And I swear that Jerry Brown, every problem we have in California was begun by Jerry Brown in the 1970s, who was the youngest governor we've ever had, and now the son of a bitch is back to finish us off. And he might just finish us off because there may be the possibility that California, and I certainly hope this happens, there is a measure on the ballot that I think is a little too extreme. It would have been so much easier to do California's 3 states as Northern, Central, and Southern California. That would have been very, very viable and would have been comprehensible for people. Now there's a plan to divide it up into 6 states, which would give us more representation, more congressmen, more senators. Maybe not more congressmen because they've limited the number of congressmen, but more senators at least. And so Jerry Brown really might finish us off. And unfortunately, because of his policies then and now, they have not allowed a business or anyone here to build dams in California. We don't have dams. We don't have reservoirs. There was a big project called the CESP, which would have brought huge amounts of water to the farmers in the middle of the state. And oh my God, all the video I had to see.
Sean. Here's your problem. Here's your problem with that, okay? You're talking to somebody who's been doing a lot of experiments recently with structured water, who's been reading Victor Schauberger in the original German in his original discussion.
Holy cow.
Yeah, exactly. Scary
Victor
stuff.
Schauberger, by the way, was an amazing German wonder weapon scientist who actually not only designed, he was an Austrian gamekeeper, and he designed most of the aircraft that we use today, the SST supersonic transport, the 747, based off fish that he saw in the water, and he invented something called the implosion drive engine. And he was here in the United States for a while in Texas, and they drove him into the ground, made him sick.
Killed him off, maybe.
Well, he went back to Austria. He finally went back to Austria and just died, I think.
Well, that's what they report.
Texas.
Yeah, that's what they report, that he just died. However, even he noted that the official report of his meeting with Hitler was that it lasted 10 minutes, when in fact he was there an hour and a half, that initial one, and was asked back the next day, and that was never recorded. So even he notes that history is a malleable product.
Schauberger, he came up with what they call, I guess, a zero-point energy or vortex implosion engine that actually captured the heart of the cyclone, really like the eye of a hurricane, if you will, on the inside of an engine. And this whole thing where he said that originally Hitler was about, that implosion was the power of the universe and the generation of this dimensional energy.
To the
explosions,
dams,
which were external combustion engines, were the work of the devil. And even Schauberger was the one that said Hitler completely changed. It's like he said it was like a demon took him over. And so go ahead. So Victor Schauberger, yes?
Okay, so Victor Schauberger observed some things that you can, in fact, duplicate. So a lot of his experiments you can duplicate on your own. And I've done a lot of that just to validate that, indeed, this is the case. And so I've been structuring water. I've been reducing it to the anomaly point of 39 degrees Fahrenheit, 4 degrees centigrade, and watching how it behaves. I've been observing the behavior of water in straight courses versus Schauberger tri-motion, elliptical, cyclical, and generative motion courses. Okay, so here's the problem. Schauberger was quite correct. Cancer and all these other diseases are related to how we are treating water across the planet. We probably, on this planet, should have no dams anywhere. And every dam we create causes further degradation of the water body of the planet. The water body of the planet is key in ways that are never discussed in Western science, in ways that affect us all. And if we had not taken particular courses, we would not be in the state we're in at the moment. But it is reversible. You can do this on an individual level. You can very cheaply build your own water structure device and prove this to yourself. I've got videos on my site, Half Past Human. If you want to go look at them, they're from YouTube, and they show you exactly how to do it. I've done my own with glass marbles. We've noticed some peculiar effects from water that are run through these very cheap devices. It's using food-grade PVC from big box stores, a bunch of glass marbles in 2 sizes, and some end caps. You put the water through there, and the water expands. The water, literally, you measure it out to 100 milliliters in a little beaker or a flask. You know that your meniscus is good right at the 100 milliliter mark, and you pour it through there. You'll get between 2.5% expansion all the way up to 15% expansion, depending on how you arrange the spheres and the little structure device. So Schauberger is not stupid. He observed things that are quite accurate. Therefore, dams are bad to humanity as a whole. Dams are not the solution to proper irrigation or proper growing techniques. There's other ways to deal with water requirements that will save us, because what we're doing is destroying water. And so let me give you an analogy, okay? This analogy is very, very accurate relative to how water should be treated by us, but we don't recognize it. And so here we are. All of us humans are trapped in a petri dish. A petri dish is this little, for those who don't know, is this little glass dish that has a top and a bottom to it, making it a closed environment in which there's some gel or gelatinous material upon which bacteria is supposed to live. And so humanity can be considered to be this bacterial colony in a petri dish on this gel. And we've suddenly woken up and we think, hey, let's mine the gel. And that's what we're doing, is we're mining the gel without realizing that our very existence depends on it. And in essence, we're attempting to do things with water, like put it into long, straight courses that destroy its structure. And here's something that most people fail to recognize. Water should not exist. In fact, does not exist. There's no such thing as a water molecule that can be seen, captured, held, in any way prove that water exists as its own molecular structure. In fact, the more you look at water, you find that it is this constant changing lattice between the gases hydrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen carries thought, and oxygen is one of the key components for the activation of hormones, which are emotion. I'll let that go. We're in a situation here where putting dams up won't solve your problems with irrigation and will cause further degradation of our water body. Sort of makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's well, of course, you sound like Billy Meyer. The Billy Meyer, supposedly the Pleiadians in the Billy Meyer case are also the ones that say, well, Earth should only have a population of 500 million people. Of course, the question of Billy Meyer is what do you do with the other 6.5 billion people on the planet? And they're all for knocking down all the dams because they claim actually the same thing that you're talking about, water degradation, and that they somehow affect the rotation of the planet as well, but they sure come in handy when you're in a drought and you have a dam and you have, and you need water.
Yeah, but look at what happens.
That's like saying you shouldn't have grain silos because if you store grain or something, then it's,
no, but you should examine whether or not you should be eating grain to start with. Because
that's not really the point. That's really not the point of the allegory. The point of the allegory
I understand that though. Yeah.
It's good to have stuff on hand if you're in a drought like we're in.
But it's no good taking water, a very vital source that contains a certain amount of key energy, life force, prana, and then destroying it by keeping it in a container behind a dam under conditions that it was never intended to endure, and destroying it at such a level that we're altering the carrying capacity of the planet by what we're doing with water. And here's something else. All this fracking. The fracking may be not at all about gas. That may be an entire conspiracy cover-up, and the whole point of fracking may be part of this triumvirate attack on water. We've killed the Pacific with Fukushima. We've killed the Atlantic and the Gulf with the continuous Corex and the asphalt volcano that's still spewing out there.
Right.
And now we're killing all across areas where the Anglo-American, the Archon-influenced empire has sway. We've come up with this idea of injecting harsh chemicals into the ground at shallow levels, which has one real good effect, and that is that one solid effect, noticeable, is that it pollutes surface level aquifers. And it may even, because of the way in which the injections are occurring and the temperatures involved, be not only causing huge levels of drought, but exacerbating natural drought conditions by forcing native water, pure water that's in a primal state, down even further into the planet because it doesn't want to deal with the heat that's been injected just above it. So we've created, in my opinion, a thermocline that never used to exist. A thermocline is a separating temperature barrier within the ocean, and certain life lives below it and certain life lives above it. We're not intended to have thermoclines on continents, and yet here we are injecting all this hot material right up above cool water and destroying the environment that the cool water needs in order to nourish us.
Oh my.
So it's gotten really weird, but you start reading Schellberger.
You're Mr. Good News all over, Cliff. My goodness.
Well, but on the other hand, see, here's my point. It's very easy to change these kind of things. Yes. And actually, if we could ever root out that, I won't go into it, expletive deleted fellow Dr. Anderson, who's monkeying about with time, he has the solution to Fukushima. We'd set up a simple generating system that gets one of his closed-loop, time-like circuits, put a bubble around Fukushima that'll last 50, 80,000 years until it's radioactive free, and have it be self-powering, and everybody gets out, and then we trigger it by a remote control. right?
Okay.
And it's in an isolation bubble. It's 1/8 of a second or so away from the rest of us, just enough of a time barrier bubble to keep the radiation from coming out. Nice. And then we don't care what happens to it. It's basically a crucible in which it's going to turn to ash. But they won't let us have access to these time guys. And in fact, the time industry in India is now gone underground.
Okay.
Disappeared.
Yeah, well, because they're just monkeying with time. It's just,
Well, and then of course there's the rumor that that their power supply. There was a strange rumor that came out that was in, I think it was Pali. I don't remember the language. I'm sorry. It was about 18 months ago. I read it and I just sort of filed it away. But you heard about the supposed discovery in Afghanistan of one of the Vimanas?
Yes, they did. The Vimanas of from, 10,000 to 40,000 years ago. Yes, indeed.
And the disappearance of 8 soldiers, right? You heard about that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, at that time, shortly thereafter, like literally within months, there were rumors coming out that not 600 miles away, there were laboratories that were investigating time for some Indian corporation, and that those laboratories experienced temporal dislocation, if you will. So indeed, there may be some substance to the idea that somebody found one of those critters, one of those ships, and turned something on that they shouldn't have. But like I say, now you can't even find these locations in the labs for the Indian time effort, so they're probably becoming quite successul. But being under the control of the, Illuminati fellows, we're not sure exactly what they're going to be successful at.
Well, if you look, I think it was Michael Cremo that I was on a panel with, and he was talking about the Vimanas and the fact that they had super technology that they were using something like 40,000 years ago. So no wonder they're tech support for the West. They've had this stuff, 39,000 years longer than we have. So,
well, I've also worked for,
it's always in India.
I've also worked for, when I was working for Microsoft, I worked for a number of, Hindu subcontractors, very astute individuals. And because of the nature of their language, they had one tendency in my viewpoint that was negative, which was that they always tended to check for the worst case first, and it's just more effective in database hunts to look for you craft your SQL statement and look for your best case first. But in any event, other than that, these people are, as engineers, there's none better in terms of the mathematic thinking. These guys were kick-ass. They even put the Israelis to shame.
Okay, so are you, and also, are you still working with your web bots and your linguistic predictive stuff?
Sure. Yeah, selling off reports now. Yeah, we've had some really interesting stuff come out that has actually come true in the report that I put out on the 8th of August. I exactly described the situation that's occurring in Ukraine today.
Okay.
And
you want to actually let's pump your stuff. Let's pimp you a little bit. So how do people get your reports, and where do they go?
Oh, you can go and buy them for $10 or some Bitcoin off our Half Past Human site. Look down in the first part of the page. It'll say Half Past Human Reports or IDIR, which is in Immediacy Data Intelligence Reports, because we're working off of an immediacy data stream that's powered by the likes of all of the social media and the quick changeover content and so on. And it gives us a real unique view of pending events, especially because I've got my shorter and longer term lexicon. This is really the difference between my system and those that are, for instance, sweeping the Twitter feed to predict stock movement, that kind of thing, right?
Right. I read a whole article on the show that had a lot to do with by Paul Joseph Watson, that this whistleblower who didn't think it was any big deal was told by the Federal Reserve to investigate Bitcoin. And when he did so, he wrote a couple of paragraphs, and he was dragged in front of this board by the heels practically to say, how dare you not take this seriously? Go back and actually research this. And then the guy came out with the assertion, and what the fear of the Federal Reserve is that Bitcoin could in fact replace or supplant the Federal Reserve note within 12 years.
I think it'll be sooner. We know this from Bitcoin's movement. There's an adoptive movement of technology that you can plot through organizations that has an inverse correlation to Moore's law. And so we knew that the very first corporation that ever had to deal with computers, it took 16 years to get to point X. The second generation took 8 years. The third generation took 4.5. It settles out about 4.5 for major technological intrusions, except in the case of software, which is basically what Bitcoin is, where you don't actually have to adopt a new hardware. This is going to come into play now that phones are ubiquitous and we'll all be working off of a phone platform. So the next time there's a Bitcoin innovation, it'll take about 2.5 years to really move. And right at the moment, we may be seeing that. There's been a recent drop in the price of Bitcoin in a dollar basis, and many people are putting it down to the emergence of a Shanghai-based arbitrage attempt to build up basically the markets that for the kind of thing that Wall Street does with dollars would exist relative to Bitcoin. You could, take a future interest in Bitcoin and this sort of thing, and it's actually influencing the price. If this is actually the cause of the recent price move, then indeed the next stage in Bitcoin's maturity is happening as we speak.
Huh. Fascinating.
Not that the dropping in price and relative to dollars is good, but the maturation of the market is such that we'll get a more robust Bitcoin at a global level, and then we'll probably see something close to the $10,000 or whatever it was that Max Kaiser was predicting earlier in the year, because we're going to hit a real hard wall here this fall, economically.
Right. Yeah, well, it's I still think we've got a year to. I think we've got.
You're in the Morton Armstrong camp. He thinks it's going to pop off on the 0.7, exactly 3/4 of the way into the year, into next year. So if you figured out whichever was the 3/4 of the way through day, that's the day he figures it'll degrade to the point where you could apply the term collapse. Now there's a definition difference between myself and Martin Armstrong. His definition of collapse includes the loss of things like the political infrastructure, the ability to vote, these kind of things. I do not include that in my version of collapse, although I know those are inevitable consequences. I'm looking for the trigger that binds all those together, and that will happen this October.
Huh. Okay. Well, and I'm not really in the Armstrong camp. It's there's a very famous French astrologer named Barbeau, André Barbeau. And he put together charts of various transits and squares and what have you for about the last 2,000 years or so, and then tracked it along economic lines. And I think the cool part about it is that what he shows is that the collapse of the global economy occurs sometime after the election of 2016. So whatever happens in 2016, whether or not it's Hillary Clinton getting in or whoever gets in or whatever happens. Everything just jumps off a cliff after that. Maybe Hillary Clinton gets in and the whole nation just commits mass suicide.
If you notice though, look at history. If we rhyme, he could be right and I could still be right, because they could be talking about a collapse at a level of the total misfunction of the state, which would occur if the bonds if the bond market globally went. The bond market in the previous depression went some 2 years after the stock market. So we could have a stock market crash this year and then a bond market crash in 2016. And it would just be a perfect timing, perfect rhyming.
Yeah, well, because then that also relates directly to I guess you could call it the time coding of the Great Pyramid of Giza, because Giza was saying that there would be a warning between 2004 and 2008. And then we would see like a part of humanity sort of jump in the hole, because it doesn't go down straight down in the pit. It's just like you kind of jump and everybody gets past 2012 and thinks they're fine. And then everybody gets washed in the pit. At some point between now, we don't really know, but it's sometime between now and 2020. I thought it'd be somewhere around this year or last year. But I really do think the timelines have shifted. I think that somebody's monkeying with time and somebody's been monkeying with the planet and all that.
Well, certainly the planet is.
Wait, Cliff, hi. Give me your website and your page one more time.
halffasthuman.com. No worries there. You can get the reports and so on. Talk to you guys later.
All right. Thanks a lot, Cliff. Thanks for my buddy Clif High, one of the best people on the planet.
Right back after this message.
We're back after this. Okay, some breaking news for you here. Kiev, August 15th, from Reuters. The Ukraine has said its artillery has destroyed part of a Russian armored column that entered its territory overnight, and said its forces came under shell fire from Russia on Friday in what appeared to be a major military escalation between the ex-Soviet states. Russia's government denied its forces had crossed into the Ukraine, calling the Ukrainian report some kind of fantasy, and in turn raised its own serious concerns about activity by the U.S.-led NATO defense alliance near its borders. Moscow accused Kiev of trying to sabotage aid deliveries to eastern areas torn by fighting between pro-Russian separatists and the Western-backed government of Moscow's former satellite. By the way, the supposed pro-Russian, just so you can know the players with a scorecard here, the actual constitutionally, legally elected government of the Ukraine was overthrown by the Western-backed CIA, Blackwater, Academi mercenaries. And anyway, just so you know. And in a call to U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel, as reported by Russia's state news agency RIA, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said Moscow was seriously concerned by increased NATO activity and called for a ceasefire to get aid into the Ukraine. The agency did not specify what Western military movements he meant. However, NATO said there had been a Russian incursion into the Ukraine, which is not a member of its Mutual Defense Pact, but is avoiding calling it an invasion. So NATO's all involved in the Ukraine, even though Ukraine's not really part of NATO, but whatever. Anyway, so, of course, neither was Libya, but there it is. Other European capitals accused the Kremlin of escalating a conflict that has revived Cold War animosities and chilled the region's struggling economies. The United Nations, that gets nothing done, said it could not verify the reports from the Ukrainian border, but called for an immediate de-escalation. And Kiev and its Western allies have repeatedly accused Russia of arming pro-Moscow separatist rebels in eastern Ukraine. In other words, the people that were with the legal government that used to be there, and of sending undercover military units onto Ukrainian soil. They have also expressed concern that Russia may use an aid convoy it is assembled on the border as a pretext for stoking the conflict. All right, so the Russians are trying to get aid to Ukrainians that are all starving to death. Okay. It was not clear whether, you got to try to look through this stuff and read between the lines. It was not clear whether the armored column was officially part of the Russian army on active service. So that's a weird thing to say. But evidence of Russian military vehicles, because just columns are just wandering around. They don't belong to anybody. Just a bunch of trucks and tanks and Humvees and whatever else. But, they could belong to Bob. It could be a wedding procession. But evidence of Russian military vehicles captured or destroyed on Ukrainian territory could give extra force to Kiev's allegations and possibly spark a new round of sanctions against the Kremlin. Andriya Lysenko, a spokesman for the Ukrainian military, said that Kiev's forces picked up a Russian military column crossing the border under cover of darkness. Appropriate actions were undertaken, and a part of it no longer exists, Lysenko said before he laughed a maniacal laugh. The situation in the conflict zone was becoming increasingly tense, he said, with Ukrainian forces which are fighting pro-Russian separatists also coming under attack. Artillery attack from Russian territory. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko briefed British Prime Minister David Cameron on the incident and told him a significant part of the Russian column had been destroyed, according to statements from Poroshenko's office. But Russia's defense ministry said no such military force had crossed the border into the eastern Ukraine. The state news agency quoted a ministry statement saying there was no Russian military column that crossed the Russian-Ukrainian border, either at night or during the day. It called the Ukrainian report, this is some kind of fantasy. It is fantasy. Britain summoned Russia's ambassador to ask him to clarify reports of a military incursion into the Ukraine, and European Union foreign ministers said any unilateral military actions by Russia in the Ukraine would be a blatant violation of international law. They have to talk. In a sign of efforts to unwind the crisis, the Kremlin said the Ukrainian and Russian chiefs of presidential staff met in Russia on Friday, and the Ukrainian foreign minister said that he would meet his Russian counterpart in Berlin on Sunday. And earlier Friday, responding to reports that a Russian column had entered Ukraine overnight, NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen said the alliance had seen what he called a Russian incursion into the Ukraine. It just confirms the fact that we see a continuous flow of weapons and fighters from Russia into eastern Ukraine, and it is a clear demonstration of continued Russian involvement in the destabilization of the Ukraine. Okay, well, the Russians didn't have anything to do with the Ukraine becoming unstable. They were, whatever. Anyway, so a spokesman for Russia's border guard service was also quoted by the news agency. Okay, there you go. So there it is. Ukrainian foreign minister, wrap it up, said in a Twitter post, because apparently that's how politicians communicate now, that he would meet Russia's Sergei Lavrov and the German and French foreign ministers on Sunday in Berlin. It can be at a square table or a round table, he said. But we have to talk, whatever that means. Additional, that's what it says, reporting to Natalie Zinets in Kiev, et cetera, et cetera. And, so there it is. So, and one other thing too is that's hackers have actually, and because we're on this topic right now, hold on. Let me just find it here real quick. Oh, days. What did I just do? I'm so sorry. There it is. Actually, two things. Let me get this out of the way because I had a caller. Sometimes I get sidetracked, and I always try to complete a thought even though it's days later. For whatever reason, I was talking about Hitler's name. In our discussion, I don't know, Hitler comes up. Doesn't he come up every day? I mean, does a day go by that somebody doesn't think about Hitler? So we were talking about Hitler, and Adolf Hitler's father was named Alois, A-L-O-I-S, so Alois or Alu. And he was nearing his 52nd birthday when Adolf was born. Now, his mother was much younger than Alois, and his mother worked as a maid in the home of Lord Rothschild. So there is access, there is motive. The fact that his father was actually very old, but there was there is a body of evidence to support the conspiracy theory that Adolf Hitler's actual biological father was actually Baron Rothschild. But the historical story goes that when Adolf was born, and he was celebrating his 13th year as a Hitler, so he was actually named Adolf Hitler until he was about 13, and then Alois, Adolf's father, was actually born as Alois Schicklgruber on June 7th of 1837 to Maria Anna Schicklgruber. And at the time of Alois's birth, Maria was not yet married. 5 years later, May 10th, 1842, Maria Anna Schicklgruber married Johann George Heidler. So Adolf Hitler was not born with the name Schicklgruber, but somehow he got it somehow. And again, the evidence pointing to the fact that the Rothschilds and these Jewish banks, the Bundesbank, and these banks that were primarily controlled by major Jewish financial factions, were the ones that actually financed Hitler. And if it was true that his biological father was in fact Lord Rothschild, then that goes with the theory that Adolf Hitler, who supposedly was jailed with Rudolf Hess, and then the mythological story goes that he and Rudolf Hess somehow managed to get their hands on a typewriter, which was a pretty rare thing in the 1920s, and that they managed to write Mein Kampf with Hitler railing away, and of course, they're in a prison where they give them all the supplies to do this. However, the other story goes that they never spent a day in jail. They claimed they did, but that they were actually smuggled out of the jail, and they spent most of their time in the rather plush Berlin apartments of Baron Rothschild. And it was in Baron Rothschild's parlor on his typewriter that Mein Kampf was actually written. Because if you really look at it, Hitler was the fulfillment of the Versailles Treaty. The Versailles Treaty that was actually signed by Max and Paul Warburg. Max Warburg for the Germans and his brother, Paul Warburg, for the Allies. The Versailles Treaty, in essence, by putting in place a series of penalties and taxes on the Germans, creates Adolf Hitler, just so they could repopulate, rearm, get the Germans in another war, and then wipe out the German race. He just completely wiped them off the planet. And whether you know it or not, a lot of these supposed concentration camp pictures that you think are German atrocities actually were American atrocities on under Eisenhower on German citizens, after the war. So, anyway, and then meanwhile, the other thing that I wanted to say here is that because information comes in spurts and starts occasionally, but this is there's a hacker group called Khyber Burkut, and they hacked personal correspondence of Ukrainian officials regarding the downed July 17th Malaysian Boeing airliner. And in the correspondence of two lieutenants of the oligarch and part-time governor Kolomoisky, as well as the new defense minister of the Ukraine, Valery Giletti, actively discussing Ukrainian fascist Air Force actions and how the local media should present the circumstances of the crash. The earlier conversation indirectly referring to the doctor who refused to remove organs from wounded Ukrainian National Guard soldiers in one of the hospitals. Now, there's a whole bunch of conversations here, but the big ones being that they basically were saying that in these hacked private conversation, they're saying that this happened on the let me see, where he says, and those a-holes at the command center in Kharkov, Air Defense Control Center in Kharkov, Ukraine, have you lost your fracking brains? I don't understand how they got caught on the border with Crimea. It was your people. I see you and your chief totally screwed up. Peter will flay you alive. Screw that. I'll do it all by myself. But in essence, what they're saying put him on the phone, and it's very difficult to translate because it's between these two guys who it's a Cyrillic alphabet. But in essence, what they're saying is that the order in the live conversations actually came to shoot down the plane from Kiev. And I'll tell the chief for sure, but why? He also has a secure phone with a scrambler. No one can eavesdrop or decode anyway. Well, I guess obviously we know that was done. So, and by the way, what's going on with the wounded? Everything okay? And it's in essence the two expressing shock at the fact that Kiev was the one that actually they said. Oh, here it is. Okay, so it's this is from the 17th. Why Kharkov was involved? The Air Defense Military Command Center. They said that the first orders came from Kiev to Kharkov Control, Air Defense Military Command Center. Only when they went on DEFCON, others began to follow. Got it. Well, later on, you'll provide me all the details in personal conversation. Any delays? Absolutely. Soon we'll be there. Just finished with the journalists. The conversation a little further up actually goes, let me see. This is also from the 17th. What happened to archives? Password does not work in 2 words. What's in there? What's in the result? Guy says regular password, check caps or language settings. Screw it. What and how did it go? Ground, surface-to-air missile, direct, referring to cannon, air to missile. Why air in the fracking world? In other words, an air-to-air missile. And the pilot reported that he could not keep planes so high for a long time, made one straight cannon salvo, didn't work, then had to use an air-to-air missile. And I believe what he's talking about, a cannon salvo is this fits in with the evidence that when he came around, I think they're actually talking about the machine guns, but then they used air-to-air missiles, what they said, and then they said, why was Kharkov involved? And they said the first orders came from Kiev to Kharkov Control, only when they went on DEFCON. So there's the smoking gun evidence, really, of being the Ukrainians, that this was not the Russians that came up on this. So anyway, there you go. All right, I'm just trying to go through I've got a whole bunch of stories for you that I've been saving till the end of the week. This is once again, this is something that concerns all of us here. This is the story from Boston to Ferguson. Have we reached a tipping point in the police state? This is from the website Blacklisted News. Journalist Will Bunch said, quote, I thought I was losing my capacity to be shocked, but events in Missouri over just the last couple of hours have crossed a frightening line, one that makes me pray that this assault on fundamental American values is just the aberration of one rudderless heartland community and not the first symptoms of a nation gone mad with high-tech weaponry to keep its own citizens in line. Now, the difference between what happened in Boston in the wake of the Boston Marathon explosion and what is happening now in Ferguson, Missouri, is not the government's response, but the community's response. And this is what happens when you ignore the warning signs. This is what happens when you fail to take alarm at the first experiment on your liberties. And this is what happens when you fail to challenge injustice and government overreach until the prison doors clank shut behind you. Consider that it was just a little over a year ago that the city of Boston was locked down completely while police carried out military-style manhunts for the subjects in the Boston Marathon explosion. They closed down neighborhoods. They went house to house. They confiscated arms. And by the way, they only found the supposed Boston bomber when they stopped martial law, because then citizens could actually be out and about with their cell phones, if you will, and it was a citizen with a cell phone that found the guy hiding in the boat, not the police. I'm also not saying the guy did it, but it's interesting. They shoot one guy and another guy you haven't heard word one from because they put him in a hole so deep. Might as well be the belly of the Sarlacc or whatever that creature is in Star Wars. But at the time, Americans welcomed this citywide lockdown, the routine invasion of their privacy, and the dismantling of every constitutional right intended to serve as a bulwark against government abuses. Oh, well, somebody attacked the Boston Marathon. Oh, there's bombers out there. Fast forward 14 months, and Americans are now shocked at the tactics being employed to quell citizen unrest in Ferguson, Missouri. This is the heartland of the country, when a massive SWAT team, an armored personnel carrier, men in camo fatigues, pointing heavy artillery at the crowd, smoke bombs, and tear gas, where residents are outraged and in the streets in response to a recent police shooting of one of their own, a young, unarmed, college-bound black teenager who had the misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So here's the problem. In the American police state that now surrounds us, every time and every place is the wrong time and the wrong place, especially if you still believe you have the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty by a court of law. Now, in the American police state, there is no longer such a thing as innocence, by the way. Might as well be Napoleonic, where you're guilty until you prove yourself innocent, which is like Napoleon and Napoleonic codes. That's France. Oh, I'm sorry, and the Internal Revenue Service as well, where they make an accusation that you owe this many taxes, and they always make it hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then I don't know if you know this or not, but you have to actually put up the tax money to the court to then go beg them to give it back to you. You can imagine how successful people are. But we're all potentially guilty, all potential criminals, all suspects, just waiting, just lurking, just acting sneaky to all be accused of a crime. Why is this happening? Why is it that not a week goes by without more reports of hair-raising incidents by militarized police imbued with a take-no-prisoners attitude, a battlefield approach to the communities in which they serve? Now, I could point out that all of you are enemies of the state, whether you like it or not. They passed the Trading with the Enemies Act in like 1933. We weren't in a war at the time, by the way. But they made every man, woman, and child in the sovereign states insurgents, enemies of the state. And who or what is responsible for the growing spate of police shootings, brutality, and overreach? We're going to talk about that when we get back. This is Strange Universe. Once again, if you want to hear Strange Universe every day on the archive in high definition, you just come to our website, strangeuniverseradio.com. That's strangeuniverseradio.com, and sign up for our archives. Or, once again, remember that the Revolution archives have been stripped from YouTube, so they have a new site now. And we'll talk about that when we get back after this.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
All right, so why is this happening? Why is it not a week goes by? More hair-raising incidents, militarized police. Moreover, as an investigative reporter, Andrew Becker and G.W. Schultz reveal, in communities large and small across America, law enforcement are arming themselves to the teeth with weapons previously only seen on the battlefield. Many people, including beat cops, now routinely carry assault rifles combined with body armor, other apparel. Officers may look more and more like combat troops serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I've been telling you for as long as we've been doing this that these were not wars. We haven't fought an actual army anywhere, I don't think, in the world since 2003, since Saddam Hussein's actual army with actual guys in uniforms with training with tanks and guns. It's all urban suppression. It's urban warfare. And I kept saying, guess what? They're all going to come back and they're going to use it on you. It's all training for suppressing us. And so to our detriment, local police, clad in jackboots, I just went to Canada. And even when you come through, even when you come through an airport where you're completely searched and scanned and everything else, you're going to customs officials who are wearing flak jackets, sitting in glass bulletproof booths to check your passport as you go through. Really? Really? Somebody's going to come through metal scanners and everything else to come shoot a passport person. Of course, if you've ever been through Canadian customs, they take every jackass, rude person in Canada and they make them work for customs. I was late for my plane, and I was just getting ready to go to the passport lady to have her check it. There's a plane full of people waiting for me. They're looking for me. They're calling me on the monitor. And this guy comes over and he starts chatting up his girlfriend, who is the passport lady. And I said, "Excuse me, sir, my plane is leaving right now. There's a whole plane full of people waiting for me." And this dude turns and looks at me and says, "Then you shouldn't have gotten here sooner." I was like, "Oh, you son of a!" And I was like, "Okay, I'm just going to go back by the line. I don't want to miss my plane. I don't want this guy getting a glove and doing ass play, or as I call it, derriere amusement." But they're all clad in jackboots, helmets, shields, wearing batons, pepper spray, stun guns, assault rifles, dogs, and they're increasingly come to resemble an occupying force in our communities. And I could comment about this also, is that police absolutely are an occupying army. They are not constitutional. The sheriff is the only constitutionally elected individual, and the sheriff has deputies, not captains and sergeants and, the stripes on their sleeves and the whole thing. That's an occupying military force. They are policy enforcers, police, the popo, policy enforcers. And actually everything they do, they really do have to actually go through the sheriff. If you've ever dealt with the jagoffs of the highway patrol, you know that the highway patrol has no power at all unless they actually go through the local sheriff. Today, notes Paul Craig Roberts, he's the former assistant to the Secretary of the Treasury, 17,000 local police forces are equipped with such military equipment as Black Hawk helicopters, machine guns, grenade launchers, battering rams, explosives, chemical sprays, body armor, night vision, repelling gear, and armored vehicles. Some have actual tanks. It's a long way from Andy Griffith and, Barney Fife throwing, Otis in the tank for being drunk. It's particularly telling that whereas in the past law enforcement strove to provide a sense of security and trust and comfort and interacting with the community, that the impression conveyed today is one of power, dominance, and complete and utter total control and inflexible authority. However, this transformation of local police into military units didn't happen overnight. It can't be traced back to a single individual or an event. What it can be traced back to is the federal government granting more and more money to militarize the cops and giving them more and more toys and more guns. And overwhelming, shall I say, the importance of a local sheriff or your local police force. The local police are the very last line against tyranny. That is why you elect a sheriff. The forefathers wisely knew that no matter what's going on in Washington or at the state level or whatever else, that if you have a sheriff that's in touch with the community, he has the final say as to what laws really get enforced and which ones don't. Now, rather, the evolution has been so subtle that most American citizens were hardly even aware of it taking place. Just the screws are just being tightened. It's like my dad used to say. My Jewish stepfather, Frank Salomon, by the way, he's the one that said, look, my father was more free than me. I'm more free than you. You're going to be more free than your kids. I guarantee you. He says, and if you want to see what's going to happen in the United States, look at England. Because everything they do, they're going to do to us, they do to England. And England's only about 10 years ahead of us. And England has become a madhouse, an absolute madhouse, where you had an Anglo-Saxon population after the Second World War of 97%. And now the Anglo-Saxons are minorities in their own countries. I point out that the American Indians, the Native Americans here, had bad immigration policies. Now you can't even find two Indians to stand next to each other in a parade. So little by little, police authority has expanded. One weapon after another, was all added to the police arsenal, and one exception after another was made to the standards that have historically restrained police authority. One violation of the Constitution, another one. Well, hey, the president doesn't obey it. Why should I? Thus, for those like myself who've studied emerging police states, who talk about 1984, who talk about Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, the site of a city placed under martial law, its citizens essentially under house arrest. Officials use the Orwellian phrase shelter in place to describe the mandatory lockdown, by the way. That's a paddy wagon. That's a rolling jail. Shelter in place. Military state, actually that's what a TARDIS used to be. It's a police call box. What did they do? They actually had a phone inside it. The constable on patrol, which is what COP stood for, could use a key to open it up to call other cops, or if he had a prisoner, he could actually put the prisoner inside the police box. That's what a TARDIS is. But with military-style helicopters equipped with thermal imaging devices buzzing the skies, which can look in your house, by the way, tanks and armored vehicles on the streets, snipers perched on rooftops, they can drive a car down the street and scan the license plates of every single car on the street and either issue tickets to every single one of them electronically or find out about where you live, what your insurance is. There's so much information that you can glean from car insurance. Tell me how having a license plate on your car now is not a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights to be secure. While thousands of black-garbed police swarm the streets and SWAT teams carry out house-to-house searches and take guns away from law-abiding citizens, and this leaves us in this massive growing state of unease. And we don't seem to care. Mind you, these are no longer warning signs of a steadily encroaching police state because, strangers, the police state is here. It has arrived. And while some critics are keen to paint the officers involved in these shootings and lockdowns as just bad cops hyped up on the power of their badge or too much coffee or too many donuts, the problem is systemic. It's more pervasive. It's in the whole thing of the more bad guys you arrest or the more skulls you crack or the more toys you get to use, the more funding you get. They actually have a monetary incentive to go out and create criminals. So first there's America's obsession with war and all things war-related. Everything's a war. There's a war on drugs, there's a war on poverty, there's a war on this, war on that. And the reason they always declare war is because a war then circumvents the Constitution. And at the same time, you're an enemy of the state. Every single one of you, man, woman, and child. Under the Trading with the Enemies Act, you are considered insurgents. You're all enemies of the state unless you change your status. But that's a whole other thing. And I'm nailing down the whole concept of the Superman paperwork, which makes you friends with them, which you go to peace with Rome. When you go to war with Rome, you usually wind up as lion food or crucified somewhere. But it's all reflected in the fact that we spend more than 20% now of the nation's budget on the military, not including what we spend on our endless wars abroad. As a matter of fact, 50% of the budget of the federal government, and this has been going on for 70 years now. So anywhere between 40 to 50%, sometimes it's been as high as 60%, has gone to the military. The budget of the Pentagon for this year is higher than the budgets of all 50 states combined, and we think that's normal. Because the U.S. also makes up 80% of the global arms export market, rendering us both the world's largest manufacturer of guns and weapons of destruction, and the biggest consumer of war. Because we're spreading it all over the world. Where do you think the Israelis are getting all those bombs to blow up the Palestinians? Where do you think the Ukrainians are getting? They're getting it from us. What do we have left? We have entertainment, we have agriculture, and we have guns, because we're America. America, we kick ass, we take names, put our boot up your ass. Because second, there's the nation's commitment to recycling America's instruments of war and putting them to work, well, here at home, thanks largely to a U.S. Department of Defense program that provides billions of dollars worth of free weapons, free armored vehicles, free protective clothing, and all these other military items to law enforcement agencies large and small across the country. Well, we just fought a war. We got some stuff left over. Here, have it. Take it. Use it on your population. And once again, as Napoleon said, you can do everything with bayonets except sit on them. which means if you have the weapons of war, you're going to use them. And third, once acquired, this military equipment, which is beyond the budget and scope of most communities, finds itself put to all manner of uses by local law enforcement. Oh, they'll come up with all kinds of ways to do it. Under the rationale that, well, if we have it, we might as well use it. Once again, sitting on spears. And the same rationale, by the way, is used with deadly results to now justify assigning SWAT teams to carry out routine law enforcement work, such as delivering a warrant or a home eviction. As an example, SWAT teams to get people out of their houses. Now, fourth, in much the same way that community police departments have been funding or finding homes for retired military equipment, they're also providing jobs for returning military personnel. PoliceLink reports, quote, as the competition for coveted law enforcement positions increases throughout the country, police and federal recruiters have the luxury of picking and choosing the absolute best and brightest individuals. Often, more often than not, police chiefs, sheriffs, and recruiters are all returning, and they're all turning to military veterans to fill positions as they staff the next wave of warriors for their, quote, ready for it, war on crime. It's the war on crime. Because it's a war, and the crime's against you. And fifth, in addition to staffing police departments with ex-military personnel and equipping them with military gear, the government is also going to great lengths to train local police in military tactics. For example, civilian police train alongside military forces as the Marine Corps Ground Combat Center in 29 Palms, California. Making full use of their weapons and equipment, the collaborative training exercise helps police incorporate military techniques and mindset into their skill set, including exercises in how to clear and move up a stairway, position themselves as snipers, take aim at opposing snipers, and clear a room. With such military training, a.k.a. indoctrination in the works, it's little wonder that police officers increasingly look upon American citizens as the enemy, as a target.
Isn't that what the National Guard is for?
That's what it's supposed to be for, but here's the deal. Because of Posse Comitatus, where we finally made a deal with the southern states that the federal military could no longer enter the sovereign states. Remember, the military belongs to the United States, the corporation, which is 10 square miles of Washington, D.C. Posse Comitatus disallows the use of the federal military within the sovereign states, which are foreign, non-domestic to the United States. Again, folks, we're not a country, we're a union. We're a union. And actually the sole exception to this is Texas. Why Texas? Because Texas not only is an independent Lone Star Republic, but Texas is only a member of the Union by a treaty called the Treaty of Hidalgo that they ceremonially sign every 2 years. And that's what allowed, I forget who the president was at the time, but that's what allowed him to send General Jack Pershing and his major domo, Colonel George S. Patton, into Texas to chase Pancho Villa across the border. And when they asked him if Pershing was going to go into Mexico to get Pancho Villa because he was raiding the border, very much like the same situation that we have today, he said, where America goes, that's where the green goes, because they all dressed in green. And that's why they call us gringos to this very day. So even though police officers are not formally trained in military tactics, and are at a minimum are being given greater access to more firepower, trained in how to use semi-automatic rifles. And it's almost like we're moving away from being community policing officials to being Navy SEALs, said Jack Curvin, president of the Boston Police Superior Officers Federation. And seventh, there's the overall glorification of war and violence that permeates every aspect of American society. Our foreign policy, our news programs, our TV shows, various modes of entertainment, blockbuster Hollywood action movies, video games. And thanks to a collaboration between the Defense Department and the entertainment industry, the American taxpayer is now paying for what amounts to a propaganda campaign aimed at entrenching the power of the military in American society. Nick Terse is an author of The Complex, How the Military Invades Our Everyday Lives. And he says, today, almost everywhere you look, whether at the latest blockbuster on the big screen or what's on smaller screens in your home, likely made by a defense contractor like Sony, Samsung, Panasonic, Toshiba, General Dynamics used to own NBC, and you'll find the Pentagon or its corporate partners. And finally, here's the American people. Whatever the threat to so-called security, whether it's rumored weapons of mass destruction, school shootings, or alleged acts of terrorism, it doesn't take much for the American people to march in lockstep with whatever the government says, with its dictates, even if it means submitting to martial law, having their home searched, and being stripped of one's constitutional rights at a moment's notice. Americans will, unfortunately, march in lockstep with the police state, and that is until suddenly they are the ones being held at gunpoint, terrorized, and stripped of their rights. At that point, as the city of Ferguson has made clear, it's almost too late to dial back the cops. Finally, the American homeland is now ruled by a military empire, and that's what I was saying. Because of posse comitatus, because of the deal that was made, and this wasn't done until the 1880s, by the way, 20 years after the Civil War, when the federal government finally said, okay, we won't use the federal police in the sovereign states. So what they did is that they get to use the federal police in the territories, so they sent them to New Mexico and California and Utah and all these places to wipe out the Indians. And at the same time, you know what's happened with George Bush because of 9/11, which changed the fundamental nature of our culture completely. Oh, and everybody says George Bush, oh, he's an idiot. He was just a moron. yeah, stupid like a fox. Because now they form Homeland Security. And by the way, in German, Homeland Security translates as the Gestapo. And they didn't even manage to change the name. So now we have the military police of the federal government under the guise of Homeland Security now breaking posse comitatus and coming into your houses. And everything our founding fathers warned us against, every single thing, a standing army that would see American citizens as combatants, as enemies of the state, as insurgents, which you are declared under the Trading with the Enemies Act. Look it up. Don't trust me on anything. Look it up. And if you want to see what happened, they declared every man, woman, and child in the sovereign states, the very act of voting is an act of insurgency, is an act against the federal government. But it's now the new norm. The government, local law enforcement, now being extensions of the federal government, has trained its sights on the American people, and we have become the enemy. And if it's true, as the military asserts, that the key to defeating an enemy is having the technological advantage, then we, the people, are screwed. So what's to be done? And as with all things, things must change, and change has to start locally in your hometown. You can take a look at your local police officers, the ones who patrol your neighborhoods and ensure the safety of the roads. Chances are they look less and less like the benevolent keepers of the peace who patrolled Andy Griffith's Mayberry and more like inflexible extensions of the new military. So who calls the shots for your local police? Who do they answer to? Who provides oversight to their interactions with local police? What drives the decision-making process for your local cops? Revenue or the rule of law? And how transparent are your local cops about their activities, their equipment, their process? In other words, who polices your local police? And if it's more police or politicians benefiting from revenue-generating programs by the police, then that's not an answer. And there are just a few of the questions that we should be asking of our local cops and governing bodies. And when the answers don't satisfy, we should ask them louder and insist that changes be implemented immediately to ensure that it is we, the people, calling the shots in our hometowns and not armed extensions of the police state. Remember, a police state does not come about overnight. It starts small, perhaps with a revenue-generating red light camera at an intersection. And when that's implemented without opposition, it's the camel's nose under the tent. Because next is going to be a surveillance camera on the public streets, then license plate readers on police cruisers, more police officers on the beat, free military equipment from the feds, free speech zones and zero-tolerance policies and curfews, SWAT team raids, drones flying overhead, and no matter how it starts, however, it always ends the same. And remember, it's a slippery slope from a questionable infringement justified in the name of safety to all-out tyranny. Well, that wraps it up. To end on a good note, a Russian fisherman was being mauled by a brown bear, and he escaped death when the Justin Bieber song Baby started playing on his phone, causing the beast to flee. I know that sort of ringtone isn't to everyone's taste, said Igor von Spiecher. All right, there we go. Hey, it's a strange universe, and we just work here. Once again, we're only here thanks to your support as friends, as listeners. All is one, life has purpose, God is love. I am, we are, and once again, the sky isn't falling, it's us ascending. Thanks for being with us, and once again, the greatest gift the universe can give us is a friend, and thanks for being mine.